Hey, what up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you with tonight's edition of Monday Night Wars, which was titled Monday Night Jericho, talking all about Chris Jericho. Now, honestly, when I think about the Monday Night Wars that went on between WWE and WCW on each and every Monday night, I always think of two names. I always think of Jeff Jarrett, and I always think of Chris Jericho. The reason why I think of those two guys, I think of how both of those guys impacted the Monday Night War situation. Basically, with Jeff Jarrett was a guy that seemed like I think he probably signed 1-year deals with each company, but it seemed like every year he was jumping back and forth from WCW to WWF to WCW to WWF, never to have really any impact on what was going down. WCW would try to make him a big deal with him following around the Horsemen, trying to get Deborah to play his way into it, and then, Chris Jericho, a guy that, really got himself over. I know it was before YouTube. I know it was before anything else, but like Chris Jericho was basically the same thing that Zack Ryder was back in 2012. He was a guy that went out and got himself over with the fans. WCW on television really wasn't giving him anything. He was getting 1 minute of promo time here or there, and every time he would go out there and he would say something original that would catch on with people, to where people kept basically people were grabbing a hold of him and they wanted to see more of him. With all of the wrestlers that were under contract to WCW at the time, for a guy like Chris Jericho to stand out in the mid-card, cruiserweight division was a real big deal. I remember catching wind of Chris Jericho when I was really starting to figure out that sometimes it really wasn't all about the sort of entertainment soap opera things. I was really trying to figure out wrestling, and I was gravitated towards wrestlers like Bret Hart, guys that could actually get in there and do it. And Jericho was one of those guys that really got it done. And they told a really good story with Chris Jericho, much like when I talked about on the WWE Rivalries review I did last night on Austin versus McMahon, which aired last night after Monday Night Raw on the WWE Network. My only problem was that 2 weeks ago they did a Monday Night War documentary, and they did it on the WCW Cruiserweight division. And I would like to say that maybe even the first 15 minutes of this Chris Jericho episode was basically the same exact thing that was aired in the Cruiserweights thing. They basically talked about Jericho being a standout. He trained to be a wrestler, and from there he would go on and wrestle in different promotions, kept on moving his way up the ladder before he finally landed in ECW. From there, he was a guy that all of the wrestlers of ECW went to Paul E and said, you need to go out and you need to sign this guy. I've wrestled this guy in Mexico, or I've wrestled this guy in Japan, and he's great and he really fit in what's going on here. And so he shared a little bit of a small time wrestling for ECW before he went on to wrestle at a show in Los Angeles called the I think it was like the Peace Convention or something like that. And basically, knowing that Chris Jericho was going to go wrestle on this show, and knowing that Eric Bischoff was going to the show to scout talent, Paul E was able to call it right there that basically we had just lost Chris Jericho. There was no way in the world that Eric Bischoff was going to be able to see Chris Jericho in a ring and know that he wasn't going to be able to steal the show to the point where Bischoff would approach him and sign him to a deal, putting him on WCW Nitro. Chris Jericho talked about, he always wanted to be a wrestler in the WWF, and he wasn't able to get on WWF's radar. So basically, he signed with WCW as a way to be able to get on their television, knowing that they were going up against WWF at the time, and there was no way in the world that, when his contract in WCW ended, he wasn't going to be able to go to Vince McMahon and the WWF and say that he wants a job, and that, Vince would be able to say that he didn't know who he was. He was going to be on his radar. He was going to take advantage of every situation that came along his way. Chris Jericho really didn't start to shine in WCW until they gave him a way to sort of show off who Chris Jericho really was. They kept on having him go out there as this sort of baby face. Jericho on his podcast talks about a lot about one of his first times on WCW Nitro. He got a win over Alex Wright. I believe it was over outside interference or something like that. And Jericho told Mean Gene during his post-match interview that he wasn't going to accept the win, and Bobby Heenan called him an idiot basically because you take a win when you're going to get one. There's not going to be many of them in your time in WCW. And, he was just this gung-ho babyface. Then all of a sudden, he started losing matches and flipping out, and he would beat up the announcer, David Penzer. And, he would always, beat him up, and then he would have like this moment of rage, and then he would apologize, and he kept on bringing Penzer new tuxes and new suits, trying to make up for what he had done the week before. And it got to the point where he finally snapped, and he never went back, where he turned on all the fans. And from there, he would make that the most of that minute promo time, where they talked about him wrestling him against Dean Malenko, one of his biggest WCW feuds, where he would do all the talking for the whole thing, since Dean Malenko really wasn't that great of a talker, and Dean Malenko would carry them to having these great matches that he knew that he could have by basically being the best wrestler that was in WCW at the time. Chris Jericho got out of the cruiserweight division. He moved into becoming the television champion, where he beat Stevie Ray on an edition of Monday Nitro. Stevie Ray wasn't even the television champion. His brother Booker T, his Harlem Heat member, was, but due to an injury, they just sort of put Stevie Ray out there, and Jericho beat him. From there, it was supposed to, give him a little bit of a rise. The TV championship was a little bit bigger than the cruiserweight division was in WCW's eyes. And he basically took that minute of promo time, since there was nobody basically filtering out what he said, and he started pointing all of these sort of attacks at Goldberg, basically trying to goat Goldberg into saying that he would do an angle with him. Basically, Jericho just wanted to get to a point where he could have a big match on pay-per-view. He wasn't asking to beat Goldberg. He was just asking to have a match. It was basically going to be a squash, because he knew how wrestling worked. People would pay the big money just to see Goldberg beat down Jericho for the first time and have it be on TV. He points fingers at Goldberg. He points fingers to Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, all for the reasons why this match never happened, even though the fans really got behind it, and they were all bringing signs that they wanted to see Jericho be, the next victim of Goldberg. And Goldberg basically had that, one of those pre-clip things that they have, showed 1,000 times, where he's being interviewed out in the middle of the desert, it seems like, and just basically said that it was stupid, that there was no way in the world that he was going to be able to sell for a guy like Jericho and make it look believable. A guy that's a third of your size, a guy that you could pick up and throw 10 rows deep into the crowd at any point of a match. There's nobody who's want to get behind that and really want to be able to see it. It was because of the Jericho match against Goldberg never happening, is when Jericho made up his mind that he was going to be leaving WCW, and he wanted to go to WWF. He made contacts with WWF. Vince McMahon flew him up, and they basically they didn't have an interview. They just had Chris Jericho sit in on a Raw meeting, and Vince McMahon even asked Chris Jericho his ideas on what they should do on Monday Night Raw, and they ran sort of storylines, and they bounced them off of him. He said it was a very weird situation to be in. A guy who's playing for the other team while you're sitting in on the other team's huddle. That must have been very, very weird. But he had to go back to WCW and wait out the last 6 months of his contract, where basically Eric Bischoff told him that he was being held down, basically because he wasn't signing a deal, so they weren't going to put him on television anymore, but he was still going to be paid his full salary while going out and wrestling house show matches. If you've never seen the YouTube, it's not the whole match, but the YouTube clip of Jericho's last match in WCW, it's some sort of a tag match involving Mysterio, Kidman, and I can't remember who the other person is. They basically have their own little clique reunion, or clique goodbye, however you want to say it, much like the Madison Square Garden clique incident. It's very good, and it's very cool to see these guys care about their brother that went on so well. From there, of course, everybody knows that Jericho would debut in the WWE, going up against The Rock in that promo where the Y2J clock came down. I remember living in those times, basically, everywhere you're going. Jericho said he saw the clock inside of a post office, and I know exactly, I didn't go to the same post office, but they had those clocks in every post office out there, counting down the days to the end of the world, pretty much, with Y2K, big thing that everybody thought was going to happen, because Basically, when they made all the computers in the world, they didn't program any of them to roll over from 1999 to 2000, and because of that, basically all bank records, all power, anything in the world that works off a computer wasn't going to work anymore, and all the computers were going to blow up. And they were running all of these Y2K tests. If you work for any kind of a company, they were pouring all types of money in to make sure that this stupid thing wasn't going to work. I worked at Pizza Hut, and I was a manager there, and our computers probably were from at least the early 80s there. We didn't have one new nice computer in the whole place. And they dumped all the money in the world to reboot these computers up to make sure they would roll over for 1999 to 2000. They probably spent more money to reprogram the computers than it would have cost them to go out and just buy new freaking computers. It made no sense to me. But from there, Jericho came in. He had the big deal with The Rock, which everybody remembers. And then they always talk about Jericho's slump. Jericho didn't wrestle The Rock right away. He just had one segment on Monday Night Raw against The Rock. Rock's first match was against Road Dogg. I apologize. Jericho's first match was against Road Dogg at the first pay-per-view that he was on. You go from being in a dueling interview with The Rock, and you go out and wrestle Road Dogg next. You're going to have a few people change the channel on you because, you came in with these huge high expectations and you get dropped all the way down. Nothing wrong against Road Dogg. He was a great wrestler. He was over at the time, but he just wasn't The Rock, and nobody ever really mentions that when they talk about it. Jericho would go on to find his own, basically having matches against Triple H. I think it took him about 6 months to get to that spot. And dueling against Stephanie McMahon. He said he's really found his own wrestling against these guys and having these awesome sort of segments where he would call out Stephanie, and he got to call her everything under the book, pretty much from a hoe bag to a slut. Anything that came out of his mouth was basically directed at Stephanie, and there was no rules. He was able to go any way he wanted to. They talked in detail about Chris Jericho beating Triple H on Monday Night Raw at that show. I think it was at Penn State is where they wrestled the show at, and the huge pop. I mean, nobody believed it. Nobody saw it coming. They were wrestling because basically Jericho had said that many guys had taken Stephanie's flower before, and Triple H got upset. So basically, they were wrestling in order to clear Stephanie's name. I guess you could say that Triple H just wanted to beat him up. And before the match, Jericho was able to goad him into putting the title on the line. I think everybody in the world was looking for some sort of DX run-in, some sort of a disqualification, and it ended up being a title change. The title change only lasted about 10 minutes. Basically, Triple H went in the back, grabbed Earl Hebner, put him in some sort of an arm lock. He was forced to admit that the count was fast because Triple H was threatening to fire Hebner and he would lose his job. So basically, they stripped Jericho, and from there, he would sort of just keep gaining momentum, and to the point where he was able to wrestle in a tournament to declare the first undisputed WWF champion, where basically they were going to be getting rid of the WCW title that they had at the time and merging it with the WWE championship. This would be Kurt Angle, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and Chris Jericho. In the first match, Austin beat Angle, and from there it was Jericho beating The Rock, and he just basically was able to celebrate this win for maybe even 30 seconds before Stone Cold Steve Austin came down to directly go into the main event, where Jericho was able to beat Austin. He still talks about this to the date as being one of the biggest sort of upsets in wrestling history. Not only do you get to beat The Rock, you get to beat Stone Cold Steve Austin back-to-back matches, beating two of the biggest stars that I've ever seen in wrestling. That sort of capped off where they ended Jericho's career. From here, I'm really feeling watching Break the Walls Down, the Chris Jericho documentary. I think that would be really cool to finish this up with. That was a really cool one. I think it came out in maybe 2010, maybe 2011. But a great DVD, great documentaries, and with a great pickup of matches on there. This was a great episode of Monday Night War. I think it won me over as I talked about it here. I was talking about all the big moments, but definitely the big downfall was the 15 minutes in the beginning. Seemed like we just saw this a few weeks ago on the Cruiserweights edition. So, peace out, everybody. See you down the road.